set auto-destruct sequence.
It's the time allotted that concerns me.
Recognize Picard, Jean-Luc, Captain. Recognize Riker, William T., Commander.
Maximum warp.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. It is I, Urza Master. Joining me as always, Lord Uther. And out in the penalty box, we've got Fert Derby, represented today by Black Square.
He's in a transporter buffer, just like Scotty.
We've
That's
kept him
really
in a
what
transporter
happened.
buffer now.
They're going to release me in 60 years.
And then you'll get to drink some sort of green alcohol on the bridge of the NCC 1701. No bloody A, B, or C. Yes, gentlemen, welcome back. Today we're talking a bit of a lighthearted episode, if you will, with Hyde and Q. Q returns for the first time since Farpoint. And, gentlemen, I'm a huge Q fan. I don't need to remind you of that. I think Q is possibly the best sci-fi character ever written. But I would be remiss if I didn't see what do we got here on this story and teleplay by C.J. Holland. Fert Derby, what can you tell us?
Thank you, Warp Core fans. I'm still here in the back of the bridge in the dark, and John DeLancie is tickling me. Stop it. So we'll get through that as best we can. It is Thanksgiving week 1987, November 23rd, 1987. And I may remind you, as always, that Lord Uther and I are still just 14-year-old freshmen in high school when Hyde and Q debuted on syndicated networks. It was directed by Cliff Bull. This is the second episode for Mr. Bull. He did Lonely Among Us earlier this season. It is also, as Urza Master did, the second appearance by John DeLancie. But there's a couple of firsts in this episode we should probably get to. First, it was almost the existing showrunner's time to quit, as C.J. Holland is actually first and second season showrunner Maurice Hurley, who came to the show, remember, from Miami Vice. He wrote the story and co-wrote the teleplay, but he was rewritten so heavily by Gene Roddenberry, he took it personally and insisted on using the pseudonym C.J. Holland. Now, this led to some acrimonious times in the writer's room and in Gene's office, and this episode, Hyde and Q, basically begins the end of Roddenberry's control over the franchise. It was because he and Maurice Hurley clashed here that the studio, Paramount, and supervising producer Rick Berman started to take a more hands-on approach to the day-to-day running, and Gene simultaneously took a step back from his insistence on multiple rewrites and micromanaging the writer's room. So good things come from this ugly encounter, if you will. But while this episode was in production, tempers were raw and feelings were hurt. And this is kind of where the beginning of the end of Gene's sort of, Star Trek is my baby. It sort of becomes other people's children, little bits at a time until by season 3, it's basically complete. Also, Marina Sirtis thought she was being fired. She did not appear in this episode, conspicuously or not, and she was worried because she wasn't getting along with showrunner Maurice Hurley. Neither was Gates McFadden, and we'll talk about that later at the end of this season and all through season 2. And so she wasn't sure that they were going to keep her around. And I find that interesting because, again, just as there's Wesley Crusher love-hate fandom all across the internet, the agency and utility of Deanna Troi has also been brought into question from time to time from various subgenres and Reddit groups on The Next Generation. Personally, stay tuned for a not-so-distant future episode with Deanna, and I think that should set everybody straight and on the record. Why do we need a counselor? What good is she doing besides saying, I feel such pain? We're gonna get to that, and pretty darn quick. But for now, she did not get to play in the sandbox with the rest of the cast in the Napoleonic era, if you will. And this was a planet in which I think it was an obvious nod to the original series. You had the green sky and the obviously backlot stage rocks and so forth. But, and I will say this with affection, I think if it was intended as homage, it did not bother me. I didn't look at it and say, the production designers really went cheap this week. I felt like it was a direct nod to those 1960s sets that we were so used to with the original crew. I may be in the minority here. I don't think, and maybe it's because of the extensive rewrites and the back and forths between Hurley and Roddenberry, I don't necessarily think that Q's dialogue in this episode, as opposed to Farpoint, I think it's a little less punchy. We don't even get an official Mon Capitan, which I think should be a new Star Trek drinking game, whether you imbibe Romulan ale or a Diet Dr. Pepper. I think every time we get a DeLancie, you must take a drink when he says, "Oh, Mon Capitan." And that one was actually missing in this episode. There were some other nice little insults and barbs. He did refer to Worf with a macro head and a micro brain, and so forth. We sidelined Tasha Yar in the penalty box, and this surprised me because, again, we're talking about November 23rd, heading into Thanksgiving, 1987. There is a sequence when the vicious animal things, and that's how they're referred to in the script. We never get a proper race or thing. They're just, everyone refers to them as the vicious animal things. They engage Wesley and Worf on the planet's surface. And I mean, for me, again, we're talking about Reagan's America, 1987. There was a shocking amount of on-screen violence. Like Wesley Crusher, a 14 or 15-year-old boy, 13, I'm not exactly sure what Will Wheaton's exact age was. He's getting stabbed in the chest, and we've got screen blood all over the wound. And Worf, too, is kind of killed. Now, again, compare that to, let's say, any kill on The Walking Dead or any of Game of Thrones or any of your favorite TV shows now, and you barely miss an eyelash. But in 1987, I'm saying, I was kind of surprised as I was watching this, saying, wow, they kind of got away with something there. That might be too intense for the kiddies. And then the second half of the episode basically turns into The Last Temptation of Riker, which this episode predates Martin Scorsese's controversial Last Temptation of Christ, 1988, and that's a whole other podcast, ladies and gentlemen. But we get to see a glimpse of what would an evil Riker look like, or if not an evil Riker, someone who has lost his moral compass, because up until now he's been the stiff, granite-jawed first officer, number one, won't let the captain go down on an away mission type of guy. And I think this episode and the next episode with him and Troy are starting to give us, again, just like we got with Picard in The Battle, we're starting to get a little bit more of who this guy is and what drives him, and his temptation to accept godlike powers from Q. Again, does the episode go deep as it would, let's say, in 2025? Probably not, but it is raising the possibilities, and it does sort of tantalizingly tease us as to, what if? So I think you got to give it points there. We get a Klingon woman and Worf sequence. We get an aged Wesley. We get Geordi in the first of several times during the series run where he'll get his sight back. Gentlemen, Hiding Q, the follow-up to Farpoint, how'd they do?
Knockout for me. I liked it. I thought it was a bit hokey, but I think it was meant to feel like a Roddenberry throwback. to the original series because I think it presented that godlike being encounter that was so prevalent in the original series. And it's not a bad thing. I think it was meant to pay homage to that. Um, and in a way, this might blow some minds. I think that was deliberate. I think it was meant to be obvious that it was paying homage because that was Q bringing about a circumstance that would have been known to the Federation from circumstances they've been in before. So the same type of planet structure, the same type of weird alien animal thing race. What almost ruins this episode for me. Can you take a guess?
The penalty box?
What am I doing? Crying? Tasha Yar ruins this episode. And there's a weird sort of like romantic tension moment between her and Picard. Like, if you weren't my captain, and she just poorly acts her way through it. Nothing against Denise Crosby, but no bueno. This Tasha Yar, no bueno. Will Riker saying, Jean-Luc, have you noticed, number one, we're now on a first-name basis? Like, yeah, okay, it was a little weird, but I thought it was played quite well. The old Wesley Crusher having the same voice as current Wesley Crusher with the dub over really didn't sit well with me. I was like, why not just have the new actor talk? Like, he's not going to have the same 14-year-old boy voice. Like, there was just some silly things that didn't quite add up for me. But that all being said, I can overlook it because it's a Q episode. And the premise for me was really strong. The idea that the Q Continuum has taken interest in one of the humans on the ship because of their last encounter, which this doesn't end here, by the way. The Q Continuum continues to be obsessed with these individuals on the ship and more to come. But that to me is just, it's an exciting foundational bit of Trek. And this is the first time that Q doesn't feel like some weird, I don't know if you want to look at it from like the perspective of not quite Harry Mudd, but a mixture of Harry Mudd and maybe like Charlie X in a way, godlike being. Not even quite as goofy or daffy as Trelane, but close. It's kind of a mixture of all those characters, but John DeLancie just takes this to a new sort of intellectual level. And this is the first time you kind of get to see that play out a bit, but it's still rooted in that TOS era goofiness. And if I think of this not as like this is Roddenberry, but this is Q, if it's a little more compelling because Q's giving Riker a situation that he would have given Kirk ostensibly, and that felt really cool.
Yeah, rehashing the God angle that we saw a lot in TOS, and here's what saves this episode for me. And we talked about masterclass in acting, and that's Stewart and DeLancie. They're how they talk to each other, how they interact, to me at least, is always a masterclass. Like, when you have the two of them on screen, you're going to get some phenomenal acting, and I feel that's what kind of saves it, because the whole idea, it's a tropey thing, because in the long run, you know what Riker's going to do. I mean, or you know what's going to happen, right? So I think I struggle with that a little bit too. Of course he's going to make the right decision. Instead of just squashing everyone and being like, I'm now a god of the universe. And not even, I don't even feel like he was tempted that much. Like, do you know what I mean by that? In terms of, he's giving people things they want. I don't know. I guess I just kind of struggled with it, obviously, because I'm struggling to explain it. But you can tell, and again, you can probably speak to this better. You can tell that there was a lot of rewriting and a lot of misdirection, and they almost like didn't know what to do in a sense at different times. So I'm happy this all happened, because if that takes Roddenberry out of the daily stuff, and maybe he's just overseeing, he's doing like the bigger picture thing, then in the long run, we know that was probably what was best.
Yeah, I think that what Gene, I think the conflict, and I haven't yet found evidence that it was directly Berman versus Roddenberry, as some people have speculated. But I think Berman was, he was brought on by Paramount as kind of like just like he was supposed to be their voice. And what will happen, a little spoiler alert for going ahead, is as Gene pulls back more from the rewrites and the day-to-day, then we suddenly get Michael Piller. And he and Berman strike a partnership beginning in the third season and moving forward. Whereas Rick Berman became Gene Roddenberry and was doing sets, budgets, negotiations, this, that, and the other. And Michael Piller was freed to basically run the writer's room and the staff. And that's where you got like a sense of direction and purpose and characterization, like the things that made TNG for the fans, like really, woo. That was his bailiwick. And so they just worked as a yin and yang, and they worked really well together. And I think some people were just intimidated by Gene Roddenberry's long career in television, the fact that Star Trek was his baby, and they wanted to do stuff to honor his legacy and his contributions, but they also wanted to move forward. And he had very strict rules going on early about, well, we're not going to have any Klingons, we're not going to have any Romulans or Vulcans, and this, that, and the other. And we're not going to have interpersonal conflict between our main cast because we've moved past that in the 24th century. And I think there was just, people felt a little inhibited. Like, we have to work within these tight contours and boundaries. And once those boundaries were kind of lifted a little or relaxed, and that starts with this episode because of the clash between Hurley and Roddenberry. Hurley was ready to quit. It got tense, but, cooler heads prevail. And I think you will see Maurice Hurley, he will contribute some shining moments here in the first couple of seasons. But, it was just like, they got a better process out of it, to your point, and that's the ultimate thing here. Everyone felt a little bit more comfortable moving forward following this episode's production and airing and so forth. And like you say, there were a couple of cooks in the kitchen, and Gene had a very specific idea of what Q was. He co-wrote the pilot, which DeLancie's character, he loved writing for John DeLancie. He told him, "You make my words sound so much better." And it's kind of hard to tell a guy in his 60s or late 60s or early 70s, "Hey, Gene, why don't you play golf today? You don't need to come into the office. We got this." And that's kind of what they were doing. In the politest way that they could. And he started experiencing health problems, right? His health started to decline in the later years, culminating, of course, with his passing, I want to say season 5, right around the time of Undiscovered Country and Unification is kind of when we lost Gene. There was that. So, how do you replace a legend? How do you ease him into the corporate suites? It's not always easy, but that's kind of what this does. And like I say, that going forward, you're going to start to see more of that consistency and some of those newer voices getting a seat at the table.
And we know it's all about consistency. And that's where I think from this episode, we'll start to see what I really feel like is the TNG identity come together quite a bit, and really quickly too. It's amazing how quick a shift we'll see in the next upcoming few episodes, that you go from what I think people see as maybe a flaccid first season of a Star Trek series somewhat, to a full-on ready to rock, self-realized identity of what becomes TNG of the future. And that's, it's not to say we don't get a few kind of oddball episodes like this, in terms of at least setting and maybe story contrivance, but they have to tie up some of these loose ends of season one to kind of move past maybe the bumpier parts. And I'm hoping everybody's picking up that I'm referencing the Tar Planet. um, but I think it's a function of this show that they're starting to grow out of the hand-me-downs of the original series. We've had some flashes of what it's going to be, and it really is as Rick Berman starts to take over and Michael Piller starts to take over more of the show running and the writing, that we really get some pretty potent next gen stuff. So I'm really excited, looking forward to that. But gentlemen, we still have to render warp core ratings for Hyde and Q, the second, technically third, Q episode of the next generation of Star Trek. Lord Uther, kick us off. How many warp cores are you giving this one?
Four and a half. I really can't go above that. It's like just reflecting and thinking about the way the sets looked and the writing, and knowing that, now I can totally see it did go through rewrites. It was very obvious. I can't go much. 4.5, man. That's where I'm at. How about you, Urza?
For me, it's hard to say, because I want to give it a 5, but I don't want to give it a 4, so I'm going to have to go 4.5 as well. It's not quite a 5. It's a little too rooted in TOS for what I feel like it could have been. But I think without it, you might not get some of the later Q episodes. So it's still really good, but it's not perfect. Fert Derby, take us out.
Gentlemen, I will go where no Warp Core podcaster has gone before. I'm going 5. The combination of a violent end, at least in the moment, for Worf and Wesley, that whole Riker, will he, won't he, although we're never in doubt of how it will end, just the natural, join us, come to the dark side, it's fun. And knowing from behind the scenes that we're going to get leaner, meaner Trek going forward, I think elevates this. Yes, all of your critiques are valid. And maybe if this had been an original series episode, I would have been less willing to embrace its flaws. But I find myself with sort of a goofy smile on my face saying, you know what? This cast is plucky. And I am going to stay in their corner. They really have to, take it on the photon torpedoes as they did in Justice for me to go lower, let's say, than that. Again, it is not Transcendent Trek. It's not even the best Q episode, if you will. But, I mean, you're starting with a pretty good place when you get DeLancie. My fear is that this is the second episode by whichever numbering system you're using, episode 9 or episode 10. I feel like we know that he's used sporadically throughout the show's run, and this one feels a little too close to Farpoint right now. I would have wanted this maybe to be episode 13 or 14 or something dead midpoint of the season. It just seems a little early to do a sequel to your pilot, but it works out. His subsequent episodes rise in intensity or comic charm. And so, we are in for a treat. And he even pops in at DS9, spoiler alert, when you guys stay with us in 2026. So he's not confined to merely one show. But I'm going 5. You guys can draft in my wake.
Very fair, very fair. And don't forget, he also pops up in Voyager and in Picard, which you can find in our archives. And if you subscribe to Pending Rebrand, you not only get all of the Warp Core podcast episodes, you also get the Graying Jedi, you get 8 is Enough, you get the Meltoff podcast, you get Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear, Roast the Niner, the NFL podcast, which the NFL Draft is right around the corner. From all of us here at Pending Rebrand and the Warp Core podcast, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification button to stay up to date with us, hit that like, drop us a comment, and make it so.